Picture this. I'm standing ankle-deep in a slurry of black, foul-smelling muck that stretches out like the surface of a dead planet, staring across a wasteland where a 47-acre crystal-clear lake used to shimmer just 72 hours ago. The air is thick, choking on the scent of rotting base, diesel fuel, and the distinct, sulfurous tang of raw sewage, while the metallic clink of my sledgehammer against bedrock echoes like a church bell in hell. Scattered across this apocalyptic mudflat like beached, dying whales are 24 million-dollar yachts, their pristine fiberglass hulls now caked in decades of sludge, looking less like luxury toys and more like artifacts from a sunken civilization. 300 yards away, on the manicured terrace of the Sterling Sanctuary, the woman who started this war, Victoria Sterling, is screaming into an iPhone 15, her voice cracking as she frantically hoses down a bone-dry infinity pool while her high-paying guests drag Louis Vuitton suitcases through the dirt, demanding refunds. 3 months ago, Victoria decided that the bridge my grandfather built with his bare hands in 1952 was an aesthetic blight and demolished it while I was burying my father. But before I tell you how I legally drained an entire lake and evaporated her multi-million-dollar empire into thin air, I have to ask you, what would you do if someone erased your family legacy while you were lowering a casket into the ground? My name is Elias Thorne, and back in October, I was just a mechanical engineer trying to survive the wreckage of a divorce, fighting for custody of my kids, and clinging to the one place on earth that didn't feel like a failure, my grandfather's cabin on Lake Obsidian. Silas Thorne, my grandfather, bought 40 acres of what was then just a glorified swamp called Muddy Bottom back in 1951, using every dime of his combat pay from Korea, ignoring everyone who said he was throwing his money into a sinkhole. But Silas had the kind of vision you only get after staring death in the face for 2 years. He saw potential where others saw mud, and he hand-built everything on that land with surplus military timber and a stubbornness that could grind granite into dust. The cabin came first, smelling of cedar and pipe tobacco, then the dock, and finally, his masterpiece, a 70-foot suspension bridge connecting our property to the main hiking trail, a structure so sturdy it survived 3 hurricanes and witnessed 3 generations of Thorne family proposals. For decades, that bridge was a landmark, a piece of living history where kids jumped into the cool water and old men fished for catfish. But then Victoria Sterling rolled into town 5 years ago like a platinum blonde hurricane, driving a G-Wagon and wielding an American Express black card like a weapon. She bought the old ranch across the water, rebranded it as Obsidian Heights, and declared herself the queen of the HOA before the ink was even dry on the incorporation papers. Her crowning jewel was the Sterling Sanctuary, a $2 million monstrosity of glass and steel that catered to people who wanted the rustic experience without actually touching dirt, charging $500 a night for the privilege of looking down on the locals. Victoria didn't just want luxury. She wanted control, weaponizing municipal codes against anyone who didn't fit her architectural vision, finding the Miller family for their chicken coop, and threatening Old Man Jenkins for his fishing shack. But her real target was my grandfather's bridge because it obstructed the premium sight lines from her VIP suites. The ambush happened on October 15th, a day that is burned into my memory with the precision of a laser cutter because it was the day I buried my dad. Cancer had taken him in 6 weeks, a blink of an eye, and I was hollowed out, running on caffeine and grief, desperate to get back to the cabin and just sit in the silence of the lake. Instead of silence, I found yellow caution tape fluttering in the wind where 70 years of history used to stand, the air reeking of exhaust fumes and fresh sawdust. Stapled to my front door was a note. Unpermitted structure removed per Municipal Code 847B. Cleanup fees assessed, $2,847. Have a blessed day. Obsidian Heights HOA. My security cameras caught it all, 7 a.m. sharp. Victoria standing there in her red-bottom heels, pointing like a dictator as an excavator tore through the hand-hewn beams my grandfather had planed himself. I crashed their HOA meeting 2 days later, walking into a room that smelled of expensive perfume and moral rot, where Victoria didn't even look up from her iPad as she told me, "Mr. Thorne, your rustic aesthetic devalues our community investments, and frankly, that bridge was an eyesore." I drove home that night with my headlights illuminating fresh survey stakes stamped with her logo encroaching on my property line, realizing this wasn't just about a bridge, it was an invasion. The next morning, a cease and desist letter arrived from Sterling and Associates, signed by her son-in-law Preston, a lawyer who looked like he'd been 3D printed at a frat party, claiming my boat launch violated setback requirements and would be demolished in 30 days. That boat launch was the last thing my grandfather poured before he died, and reading that threat triggered something cold and hard in my chest. I drove straight to the law office of Elena Rossi, a woman who operated out of a converted Victorian house that groaned in the wind, a lawyer who didn't charge you for thinking and knew where all the bodies were buried in this county. Water rights, Elena said, spreading my grandfather's yellowing deed across her desk like a treasure map, her eyes scanning the fine print with the intensity of a hawk spotting a field mouse. People think they own the view, Elias, but your grandfather, he was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. She explained that in 1953, the federal government used flood control money to expand the lake, building a concrete dam on Silas Thorne's land. And while he granted an easement for the dam, he retained ownership of the structure and the water flow under something called the riparian doctrine. Elena pulled out a dusty law book and smiled, a sharp, predatory grin, telling me, he didn't just buy land, Elias, he bought the nuclear option. If the dam owner suspects the structural integrity of the lake is compromised, they have the unilateral authority to drain it for maintenance. I was still processing the fact that I held the plug to Victoria's bathtub when the war turned physical. I woke up Friday to find my boat dock sabotaged, the support posts sawed through with surgical precision, leaving my aluminum fishing boat listing like the Titanic. My security cameras had been spray-painted black, providing Victoria with a convenient alibi during her charity wine mixer. But criminals always get sloppy. A young kid named Caleb, who worked maintenance at the marina and looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his skinny shoulders, knocked on my door, whispering that he'd seen Preston's truck leaving my property at 2 a.m., and showed me a text offering a bonus for discreet removal services. While I documented the damage, Elena dug deeper into the state archives and found the smoking gun. The 1954 environmental study for the dam mandated public access and emergency drainage rights for the owner, meaning if I, the owner, deemed the dam unsafe, no HOA covenant or municipal judge could stop me from pulling the plug. The irony was delicious. Victoria had destroyed my bridge to improve her view, never realizing that her entire multi-million-dollar view depended on water that I legally controlled. But I couldn't just walk out there and open the valves. I needed to be bulletproof. I called Walter Finch, the county engineer, a man with skin like weathered leather and a hard hat that had seen more campaigns than a general, asking him to inspect the structural integrity of the dam. Walter arrived on a crisp Tuesday morning, and while the concrete was solid, what he found in the water made his face go pale. Siltation caused by the resort's high-speed boats was clogging the intake, and soil samples revealed heavy metals, fuel runoff, and chemical residue from hull cleaners turning Lake Obsidian into a toxic soup. Federal guidelines are clear, Walter said, scribbling notes that would become my sword and shield. This needs immediate environmental remediation. You need to drain it, dredge it, and let the ecosystem reset, or you're looking at a catastrophic failure down the line. Victoria, sensing that I was up to something, decided to go nuclear. She plastered the town with flyers featuring my mugshot from a bar fight 10 years ago, which was dismissed, calling me a dangerous, unstable element, and implying I was a threat to the community's children. My phone blew up with calls from neighbors, friends, and even my ex-wife Jessica in Denver, asking why I was being painted as the local Unabomber. But Victoria overplayed her hand. The local sheriff, Deputy Miller, a man who had fished with my grandfather, knocked on my door holding one of the flyers, his face a mask of quiet fury, informing me that publishing sealed court documents and defamation was a felony. While Miller opened an investigation into her harassment, Elena found the second bombshell in the archives. The Sterling Sanctuary had been built without proper wetland impact studies. Successor liability, Elena explained, her voice trembling with excitement as she laid out the documents. When Victoria bought the land, she inherited the federal obligations. She never filed the permits, which means she's sitting on a $2 million resort that is technically an illegal structure on federally protected wetlands. The trap was set, but Victoria wasn't done. She showed up at my door with Preston and 2 hired goons from a private security firm, trying to intimidate me into selling for $400,000. I looked her dead in the eye, smelling the desperation beneath her Chanel perfume, and told her, "I have something better than money, Victoria. I have time." That weekend was the biggest revenue event of the year for the Sterling Sanctuary, a massive fishing tournament on Saturday and a high society wedding on Sunday, with total projected earnings of 50 grand. Caleb texted me that the resort was fully booked and Victoria was strutting around like she owned the world, completely unaware that she was standing on a trapdoor. On Friday afternoon, Victoria played her final, dirty card. My ex-wife Jessica called me in tears, saying a woman in a white Range Rover had shown up in Denver offering her $50,000 to testify that I was an unfit father and to file for emergency full custody. Victoria was trying to drag me into a court battle 3 states away, so I'd miss the drainage window. But Jessica, despite our differences, knew I was a good dad, and, more importantly, she hated bullies. She recorded the entire conversation, capturing Victoria explicitly bribing a witness, and sent the file to Elena. "That's federal conspiracy," Elena said, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "We have everything. Let's burn it down." Saturday morning, the day of the fishing tournament, I walked out to the dam with Walter Finch, Elena, and a team from the state wildlife department led by Dr. Aris, who was there to rescue the fish. The sun was rising over the water, painting the surface in gold, a deceptive beauty masking the poison beneath, and I placed my hand on the manual crank my grandfather had installed 70 years ago. Victoria came screaming down the hill in her silk pajamas, flanked by Preston and her security team, waving a piece of paper that looked like a court order. "This is an emergency federal injunction," Preston shouted, his voice cracking. "You touch that valve, and you go to prison for domestic terrorism." Elena took the paper, glanced at it, and laughed, a dry, terrifying sound. "This is signed by Judge Holloway, Preston. Judge Holloway retired 2 months ago. This is a forged document. That's another felony for the pile." Deputy Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his holster, and told the security team, "You boys are trespassing on private property. Move out or get cuffed." The security team evaporated like mist, leaving Victoria standing there, shivering in the morning chill, watching as I turned to the assembled news crews, the environmental agents, and the ghost of my grandfather. "I'm not destroying the lake," I told the camera, my voice steady as stone. "I'm healing it." And then, I turned the wheel. The sound was mechanical and satisfying, a deep, subterranean thunk followed by the roar of water rushing through the spillway, a sound that signaled the end of Obsidian Heights as a luxury destination. The water level began to drop, 6 inches an hour, exposing the shoreline like a receding tide of judgment. By noon, the fishing tournament was a disaster. Boats were running aground on mudflats, propellers churning up black sludge, while angry fishermen demanded refunds. But the real horror show started at 2 p.m. when the water level dropped low enough to reveal what Victoria had been hiding. As the lake receded, it didn't just show mud. It revealed a graveyard of rusty oil drums, construction debris, and a secret PVC pipe running directly from the resort's main lodge into the lake, an illegal sewage discharge line that had been pumping raw waste into the water to save on septic pumping fees. Agent Vance from the EPA, who had arrived with the federal team, took one look at the pipe and the reading on his spectrometer and literally gagged. "This is a biohazard site," he muttered, pulling out his radio. "Get the hazmat team. Now." The wedding party arrived at 4 p.m. to find their picturesque lakeside venue transformed into a stinking mud pit filled with dying algae and federal agents in Tyvek suits taking soil samples. The bride, a pharmaceutical heiress who had paid a fortune, went apocalyptic, screaming at Victoria while her guests covered their noses with silk handkerchiefs to block out the stench of corruption. Victoria tried to spin it, shouting at the news cameras that I was an environmental terrorist, but the visuals spoke for themselves. Her pristine resort was literally sitting on a pile of its own filth. At 5 p.m., Agent Vance walked up to Victoria, who was frantically typing on her phone, and snapped a pair of handcuffs on her wrists. "Ms. Sterling, you're under arrest for violation of the Clean Water Act," bribery of a federal witness, fraud, and conspiracy. The sight of Victoria Sterling being guided into the back of an SUV, still wearing her silk pajamas and a fur coat, screaming about property rights, was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Preston was found hiding in the wine cellar with a briefcase full of cash and fake permits. He was let out in cuffs past the ruined wedding cake, weeping openly. By Sunday evening, the lake was gone. In its place was a vast, alien landscape of cracked earth, but flowing through the center was the original creek bed my grandfather had loved, sparkling clean and free for the first time in 70 years. We found Native American artifacts, old farm tools, and the original foundation of the valley, history that had been drowning, now breathing fresh air. The aftermath was a massacre. Victoria and Preston are looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The resort was seized by the government under asset forfeiture laws to pay for the environmental cleanup, which is estimated to cost $3 million. I rebuilt the bridge that Thanksgiving. It wasn't a solo job this time. The whole town showed up, contractors donated lumber, the high school football team hauled beams, and even the Miller family brought fried chicken. We dedicated the Silas Thorne Memorial Crossing with a plaque that reads, "For the water, and those who protect it." The lake refilled naturally over the next 6 months, fed by mountain springs, and when the water came back, it was different, clean, smelling of pine and rain, free of the diesel and ego that had poisoned it. The fish population exploded, the birds returned, and I turned the land into a non-profit conservation trust, ensuring that no developer could ever touch it again. Standing on that bridge today, watching the sun dip below the horizon and painting the water in hues of copper and violet, I realized that sometimes you have to drain the swamp to find the solid ground beneath. I didn't just win a lawsuit, I saved a legacy. But here is the question that keeps me up at night, and I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. Was I right to use a nuclear option that destroyed legitimate businesses and ruined a wedding just to punish one corrupt woman? Or is absolute justice worth any collateral damage when the system fails to protect the little guy? Let the debate begin. Thanks for watching.